We are here with Brother Ethan, and we're going to work through his introduction. You know, we've been getting to this place all along. In fact, I think one of the first questions I had posed to me when we started this preaching class is like, well, don't you do the introduction first because it comes first? And the answer is no, not typically. And here's why. Because until you know exactly what you're talking about and have actually fleshed that out during the week of your study and preparation for your lesson or your sermon, you don't really know how to handle the introduction. And the introduction is absolutely essential to the sermon as a whole, because within, like anything, you know, used car salesman, whatever it is, man, whatever happens within those first 2 minutes, 3 minutes tops, you either got them or you don't. That's why an introduction is very essential. And you need to pour some time into it. It needs to be very informed. Again, stressing the fact that you've already written the lion's share, at least, of the body of your sermon. You have that manuscript out in front of you, and you have all of this information now to utilize and to bring to bear on this all-important starting point for our sermon and our lesson. And so we're going to use a text from Brother Ethan's upcoming lesson for some kids, and so that's what we'll be using out of John 12, chapter 12, verse 12. How far down does it go, by the way, real quick?
So, absolutely. If we're going to the end of the text that really hits the main theme.
Yeah, man.
We're going all the way to...
it's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's 43.
43, so, okay.
Yeah.
So, look, if you're out there in video land, that doesn't mean I'm going to read the whole text to you. Don't worry about that. We are going to focus primarily on the introduction. And bear in mind, we're not doing it the way that you would in your study. We're kind of winging this. But we'll still have some good ideas here. And what I need you to follow along with me is in the steps to the sermon, the 6 elements of an introduction. That's what we're going through. We're going to flesh that out. And we're going to develop something really quick here for Brother Ethan. Brother Ethan, in that text, you know, because we discussed this a little bit beforehand, and so I'm just going to impose on it a little bit. I could be off a little, but I think we're pretty close. And so we're going to look at this as the something along the lines, our plural noun proposition would be the 3 aspects of the glory of Christ. Yeah, something along those lines. And so here's our plural noun proposition. 3 aspects of Christ's glory. Here's our purpose, because we understand what glory means. In Greek, it's doxa, doxology, is where we get that word from. And it's not just a big shiny light, you know, surrounding Jesus, you know, his aura, whatever you want to call it. It's the meaning of that light. Light shines light on something and allows you to see it as it truly is. And so that is what is meant by the glory of God, the glorify his name, the glory of Christ. It means to see him in his true light and understand his true nature and character. And so the purpose then of this particular lesson or sermon would be to enable you to see the true character of Christ. And so that's what we want you to. In fact, if we want to go beyond just the cognitive, it would be something along the lines of, my purpose is to enable you to submit yourself to the glory, the true character of Christ. Something along those lines, okay? So I'm not going to try and rewrite that. We do have a purpose. There it is. And then, of course, we would have our outline. I'm not going to redo that. The main thing when establishing your introduction is actually going to be found right here in your plural noun proposition. I'll show you how that works here momentarily. When you have the subject in mind, the glory of Christ in this instance, then you have everything that you need to develop not only your purpose statement, not only your outline, but now, as you've done all of that work, now you have everything you need to bring to bear on that all-important introduction, okay? And so let's start walking through those. These are found, again, in your steps to the sermon. The first thing that you have to do is get their attention. Now, you can use something along the lines, you could use synonymous terms like, an icebreaker, whatever. But here's the thing. This is not the time to get up there and tell, your favorite jokes. Not necessarily. This isn't the time to march out, the female midget jello wrestlers, and do something stupid. This isn't just get their attention for the sake of getting their attention. You want it to be loosely attached to this all-important subject, Christ's glory. Now, notice what it says in the section, Introduction, 6 elements. Number 1, get attention. Look at what it says there. This information is general, remote, impersonal, okay? It's fairly self-explanatory. In other words, you're not going for the juggler, which is this, right here, the subject. It does not strike at the immediate context of the sermon, so you're not going to develop the sermon in front of them initially, and it does not address their need. All of this stuff takes place later on in the introduction and throughout the body of your sermon. And so the get attention is just that. You're wanting to take approximately a short amount of time. We're talking like tops 3 minutes. And I want you to think about that. If you ever had to stand in front of a camera and blab on for 3 minutes, that's an eternity. And it's an eternity from the pulpit as well. It takes time, and 3 minutes is forever. And so you really want to make sure that that's very succinct and it speaks real quickly, and now you've got them, right? Okay, so all of this stuff indicates that it needs to be general, remote, impersonal, does not address their needs, and it does not strike at the immediate context of the sermon. Here's where I would differ with that statement. I think that it needs to, at the very least, elude, point indirectly towards the subject. So here's our subject of our sermon, our pretend sermon lesson, whatever. Again, John 12 through 43. 3 aspects of Christ's glory. And so here's our subject. Christ's glory. Now then, this is where you have to be creative. You really do. You have to put a lot of thought into these things. And often the big mistake I make is after having written an entire sermon throughout the week, and I'm completely and thoroughly burnt out, wrung out, I'm just like, you know what? I could care less if they're interested in what I'm about to preach. They'll get interested about halfway through. No. Really, this is when you have to be at your best. After you're exhausted and you know the text inside and out. And now somehow you have to, once again, exert the energy to come up with a get attention aspect of your introduction that somehow is very loosely attached to the subject of the sermon, Christ's glory. Now, this is where we sometimes get the benefit of knowing the bigger context. And so here's what I'm just going to give you a behind the veil scenes of what's going on in John 12 through 43. It is initiated by Jesus coming into Jerusalem. This is, if you will, Palm Sunday, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the triumphal entry. Everyone's there because, again, it's Passover, so that Jerusalem is packed. Jesus has been known in particular, and it says this in the text, for the raising of Lazarus. And so there's a crowd there, and they're singing Hosanna to him. They're putting the palm leaves in front of him. He's riding in on a little donkey. And so this is in fulfillment of a prophecy in the Old Testament. And what you have is really 4 distinct groups projecting their preconceived ideas on who Messiah is supposed to be. And so some of them are there, and they've been following him, crowds that have been following him since the time of Lazarus, and I'm sure that this crowd has actually just grown, and he's done other miracles on the way to Jerusalem, all that. And they're there because Messiah is the miracle worker. He gives me what I want. He's an amazing man. Mm-hmm. And so that's their preconceived idea. There's others. If I'm not mistaken, the Pharisees show up, and of course they're hurling their constant barrage of insults, and look, he's getting people to follow him instead of God, and they're there in judgment, and they look at him as a godless sinner. That's their preconceived ideas. Then there's a group of Greeks that tell some of the other disciples, hey, we would like to talk with Jesus. And so he's very interesting to them, intrigued by perhaps his teaching, and most certainly the miracles that are going on. Defies the mind. And then there's the fourth group, which is the disciples themselves, who have their own preconceived ideas about who Messiah is supposed to be. And here in particular, it may have been something along the lines of, well, he's the king. But their idea of the king at the time, and this would be true of many of the people in Jerusalem as well, is that, well, he's going to literally be an earthly king that's going to kick out all the Romans and give us what we want. Reestablish Israel the way it once was under the Davidic kingdom. And so all of them are now projecting these ideas onto who Christ is. This is who he is. And this is why I'm all excited about him coming into Jerusalem. And then they go to introduce Jesus to these Greeks, and he totally ignores their request. And here's why. He's like, the hour has come for the Son of God to be glorified. And he uses this word, glorified and glory and what have you, over and over again in the next few verses. Again, alluding to the fact that the subject of this sermon is Christ's glory. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then, the way that I'm thinking about this, get attention, let's write that up here. Get attention. I know our subject is Christ's glory, but why is he having to speak about his glory? In fact, what he's doing there, by the way, everybody's coming with him, at him with all these preconceived ideas, projecting what they think he should be onto him, and he's saying, this is who I am. Here's my glory. It's time for me to be glorified. In other words, it's time for me to reveal who I really am, to shine a light on my true nature. Boom. I am not the king to come here and kick out the Romans. I am not merely a miracle worker. I am not a sinner here to upset your fragile little religion, Pharisees. I am not just somebody to be interested in as a great teacher, Greeks. I am Christ. I am the Son of God, and this is who I am. Boom, now he's going to reveal it. And so, given that context and understanding it in that light, what we had discussed, me and Ethan, that a great attention getter, and this is in the context of a lesson plan for children, a great get attention would be to ask some of them, like, hey, who is Jesus? Who do you think Jesus is? And knowing little kids, they're going to give one-word answers, some right, some wrong. He's going to say, he's my best friend. He's God. Some of those really godly kids from godly parents, much like you out there, they're going to come up with the right answer. They're going to come up with all sorts of ideas. And the idea is this. You want them to start thinking like they were thinking perhaps in that context. Mm-hmm. And using that as an example, you see, we all have ideas about who Jesus is. And there were people that as Jesus is coming into Jerusalem on that day, they had a bunch of ideas, some right, some wrong, some half right, and they were putting these labels on him. This is who we want you to be, but we really don't know who you are. And then Jesus shows up and says, this is who I am. Now, there may be other ways to go about this. Maybe that wouldn't work, in a church setting on a Sunday morning with, 100 plus people. Who knows what's going to come out of adults' mouths? You ask that question, and surely some guys are going to say something, somebody's going to say something. But that may not work. You know what might work, and where my mind goes to right now is, thank God for YouTube, at least on occasion. I used a clip just the other day that was very good for getting attention. The subject of the sermon was the love of God. It was out of 1 John 4, 11 or 7 through 11 was the text. In this is love, not that we have loved him, but he sent his son to be a propitiation for sins. That was the heart of the text, verse 11, I believe it is. And in any case, so I wanted to start off the sermon like this. I got a video clip. It was no more than a minute long, and it was from YouTube, and it was 30 different ways to say I love you in different languages. It was really cool. And so we marched through that, and what I liked about it is I was watching the reaction of our people here at Grace Hill and seeing how these people were saying I love you in Spanish and Icelandic and all these different really cool languages, and seeing those people's expressions as they said I love you in these different languages. Our people were really engaged with it, and that's what you want. You just want them to get their attention. And they're hearing I love you. And so how I segue, how I utilize that was like, man, isn't that amazing? That was really cool to hear I love you in this language and in Portuguese and in this one. Let me ask you this. How has God said I love you? And that's it. Now that's my bridge. That's my transition into the next part, secure interest. And so there it is. That's what it looks like. Get attention does just that. Loosely associated or alluding to the subject. But what you really want is for them to do this. Boom. Look at you. Engage with you. Track with you. And that's hard to do. It really is. Harder than you might think. And it takes practice. It takes time. I don't even know if I'm really good at it. But I know the technique. And if you use these things correctly, you can really start off your lesson, your sermon, in a very powerful way. That grabs them, brings them in, and now, and this is your goal with the get attention, now they're ready to give you a listen. You've relaxed them, you've captured them there for the moment, and now, much like when you're fishing, they've nibbled at the bait, the next phase of secure interest, now you want to sink that hook. Pop. That's it. And so, let's look at this get attention again just real quickly from my brother. So, we discussed this, and now we see how it's connected with the subject, Christ's glory. This is who he truly is, and why he's having to reveal who he truly is, because we have these 4 different perspectives coming from the people of Jerusalem, Pharisees, Greeks, and even the disciples themselves. And so, how do you feel about, in your lesson, perhaps having the kids do that? Do you think that that's going to work? Is that going to provoke attention for them?
Yeah, I think that at least it would give them a chance to be on their feet and put them on a spot. So at least maybe they can realize that either they are on the right track or they don't know anything, and then now they can understand that.
It's weird. It can help them evaluate. Like, man, do I even know who Christ is?
Truly,
I gave a real loser answer, man.
Because it can just kind of pass over their heads, if they just say, "Well, I'm here at church, learn about Jesus."
Look, dude, I was playing Bible trivia. I went to church on occasion when I was a kid. Most notably, when my buddy Rick Galvin and his brother, when I stayed the night with him when I was a kid, his mom, you got to go to church. Really, that's the deal. But I liked hanging out with him, so I'd go to church the next day, and it was a horrible church. Right? So Sunday school, every time they had Sunday school, it was just Bible trivia. Literally, they'd break out the game and we'd play.
Crazy. Oh, we got that over there? I'm just kidding.
Probably. But in any case, it's a great game. I'm not saying that it's bad. I did learn this from it. I spun the thing, boing,
Yeah.
whatever stations, never doing my
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
The question comes up, why did Jesus die on the cross? And I went,
Wow.
you tell me, I haven't got a clue. She's like, you don't know? I was like, why would I? I don't have a clue.
Wow. Wow.
You tell me again, I don't know.
True.
And I was probably like 13, 14 years old.
Honestly.
And didn't have a clue as to why he died. And so what I'm getting at is that especially with lessons with kids, interaction is a great attention getter. It really does work. With adults, it can work too, but when you're in a bigger context, they're not expecting, like, most adults aren't going to volunteer. They're terrified of speaking out loud. Whereas kids, they don't view it as public speaking.
Yeah.
They just view it as, normal. Like me talking loud, my inside voice, they're good with it.
My inside voice.
And so it's all good. So I think this works. In regards to a sermon in a Sunday morning context, you could probably ask this question, who is Jesus? You could probably find some kind of interview thing or what have you. Ray Comfort probably has one on a video clip. Better yet,
So true. Yeah.
get your own camera and a buddy and go down to the mall, go down to the flea market, go to a sporting event here in town, and just ask, like, hey, can I get you for 10 seconds? Who is Jesus? Go. And they're going to tell you.
Oh, man.
And that would be a great attention getter.
Ooh.
Everybody is going to be riveted on that section of your sermon, And so utilize media sparingly, but if you're going to use it, man, bring the noise. Make sure that it's powerful and it's going to really set you up to deliver a great sermon or lesson. Okay, so now, everything entails a transition or a bridge. So when you've got their attention, now you've got to build a bridge to the next section, which is number 2, secure interest. Let me erase a few things and we'll get there, okay? So, blah, 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 that. And we'll do this. Actually, let me just move that. Here's our subject. Again, is Christ's glory. Okay, I hope you can see that. And now we're looking at secure interest. There on your steps to the sermon. So let's read that. You should have it in front of you, and it kind of tells us how to track with this. Number 2, secure interest. Be passionate about the subject. By the way, how do you have passion? Is that, do you put it in your notes? Yell here, slam fist on. That's not it. Passion comes naturally for those that are in love with God's Word, that are in love with the truth that they have been meditating upon in their personal devotion, studying on in the study, in the office, what have you, living out in your life. You maybe have had to repent of some things. You maybe have had to add some things to your life. You've had to be changed internally and outwardly as a result throughout the course of the week. And then, and only then, man, are you capable of having any kind of authentic passion because God's Word has done something to you in preparation for delivering that sermon or lesson. And so passion isn't something that you drum up. It's not you yelling louder. It's not you fake crying through something. It is God doing a work in you throughout the week that is then coming out of you during the delivery of that sermon or that lesson. So be passionate about the subject. How? Be in the Word, be broken by it, be changed by it, live it out, and then you'll have some kind of passion because you've experienced it for yourself. Okay, so here's the reasoning behind being passionate, because this sets the tone for the rest of the sermon. If the get attention sets everything up, the secure interest, this is, if you will, like it says, it sets the tone. This is going to be the pace This is going to be the sense of urgency, the relevance, if you will, that you're bringing to bear upon it. And so this is where you're really taking them deeper into the text. And now, if you will, they're excited to hear what's coming next, because you've built something. I think it is Martin Lloyd-Jones, who is this famous preacher from England. He basically said his introductions were set up like a doctor's appointment. You come in and he would do an evaluation, the doctor would, and then here's his, what would be next? A diagnosis. Here's what's wrong with you, and here's what I prescribe, And it's kind of like that. This secure interest is very similar in the sense of you're really taking them to a place where they're like, I have to hear the rest of this. I've got to see this thing through.
Yeah.
I'm there.
Definitely.
So, secure interest, be passionate about the subject because it has done something in your life. God's Word has. This sets the tone for the rest of the sermon. So, how to secure interest. Use a question and answer it in the sermon. This is referred to as a probing question. It's not just some kind of vague question. It's one that probes the subject. And so you're asking something that's very relevant, and you do not answer it in the introduction. You answer it in the body of the sermon, okay? And so, by the way, these little hints here, you don't do all of them. Pick one, maybe two. So in your introduction, you're not like, oh, okay, so I got to use a question and answer it in the sermon. Let me do that first, and no. You just do one or two at the very most. So use a question, answer it in the sermon. What would be a great question? Understanding that Christ's glory doesn't limit itself to a big shiny light every time he shows up. Mm-hmm. Christ's glory is the light of God revealing who Christ truly is, fully God, fully man, sinless life, died on the cross for our sins, and risen so that we can have eternal. That's who Jesus really is. That's his glory. So what's a great probing question that speaks to this issue of Christ's glory, his true nature? How would we provoke, be it children or otherwise, adults, to think critically about Christ's glory, a question that would help them really understand who he is? Or want to understand, more importantly. Because secure interest is all about motive. Why am I in this? Why am I going to listen to this guy for the next, in my case, 45 minutes of boo,
Boo.
So here's our little probing question. Bam. And you marry this again to the subject, Christ's glory, who Christ really is. Okay, I'm gonna throw one at you. You good?
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So here's very basic question to secure interest. So, everybody's answered the question, the kids, or be it a video thing, like, who is Christ, and some people say, well, he's just a dude, and like, oh, really, was there a Christ? You're going to get all sorts of goofballs if you go down to the mall. We're going to get all sorts of weird answers, He's the guy that showed up at the bottom of my bed the other night, as an apparition. He said, I don't have to go to church. I've heard that one. And so, in any case, I think a real good question is this. Now that we've watched on a video, if that's what we used, or some kind of interview, now then using personal pronoun, okay, you. Let me ask you, if I were to get you up here, who would you say Christ is? This is a question that Christ himself asked.
I am, yeah.
Who do people say that I am?
Yeah.
Wow. Peter gave the right answer. And then he blew it soon afterwards. But this is a very relevant question. This is the kind of question that determines if your answer, in regards to your answer, it determines if you spend an eternity in hell or an eternity in God's presence. And so this is urgent, this is relevant. So who do you think Christ is? That secures interest.
Yeah.
Do you see how I kind of leverage that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it doesn't take long. Again, we're not talking about waxing eloquently for 20 minutes on the secure interest. These are, if you will, I like thinking of preaching in terms of a boxing match. I do.
Jabs.
Yeah. Actually, to be honest, the first punch thrown is a jab.
Yeah.
Just like any good boxer,
Yeah.
So get attention, that's a jab. Boom. This is why we utilize quotes from guys like Piper, R.C. Sproul, John MacArthur, Mark Driscoll, Matt Chandler. You get well versed with these guys. You read their books for contemporary kind of people to quote and to utilize. But then read the classics. Read Spurgeon. Read Edwards, Calvin, Luther, John Owen, some of the Puritans. Man, these guys have fabulous stuff that you can use not only in the body of your sermon, but in particular in your introductions. Especially at this place of securing interest, okay? And so, give examples, both secular and biblical. I don't know how to utilize that in this instance, and quite frankly, it's something that I don't do that often. If I did, it would be like, here's who the world says Jesus is, as opposed to what we find in Scripture, or something like that. Give them something to loathe and something to love. Now then, this is Dr. Aubrey. This was his favorite go-to secure interest thing. And so he used this quite often, usually a biblical illustration of some sorts. And that's how he would use this. And so you provide them, and it can be one or the other or both. You can give them an example of this is who Jesus is. For instance, if you really wanted to, just go down and dirty, man, and be ugly about it, you could quote, 3 or 4 false religions and their view of who Christ is. Give them something to loathe,
Yeah.
For instance, Muslims would say, yeah, Jesus was just a guy.
Prophet, yeah.
He's just a prophet, what have you. You could go with the Jehovah's Witnesses that teach you that, yeah, Jesus was a little God, not real God, What is it? Mormons teach you something along the lines that he's our elder brother, and he's the literal offspring of some kind of union, intimate union between God and one of his heavenly wives. That's kind of twisted and sick, but whatever. That's something to loathe, right? But what does the Bible, who did Jesus say that he was? And so then we unpack that in the context of the sermon. Show that this subject is essential and matters. And that kind of sums everything up. You do that with passion, setting the tone, understanding that what you're about to share is going to set the tone for the rest of the sermon. You show that the subject is essential and matters, it's relevant, by asking a great probing question or supplying information that sells the topic by using these extraordinary quotes that will bring light to bear on the text, giving examples secular and biblical, or giving them something to loathe or something to love. In doing that, then you are showing them, hey, this subject matters. I need to pay attention to this. You've secured my interest. That's where we're going. All right. Whew. It's a mouthful. It's a big deal.
Is that everything right there? Or?
No, man, we got some more.
Oh.
Now let's make connection with the previous sermon. Some people wonder why this is in here. I know I used to when I was first taking preaching. Why do I need to connect with the previous sermon? And the reason this is a question for many of us is because we're unaccustomed to expository preaching, which means to preach through entire books, right? And so we're accustomed to topical sermons that just jump all over the place, and there's no way to really connect the dots to the previous sermon because we were taking that previous sermon out of context anyway. And so we didn't set the whole book in order and then start preaching it now. And so this is something that you do as an expositor, preacher, or teacher. You want to make sure that they understand for the bigger picture. You're taking them back just for a moment. You're probably reiterating the plural noun proposition from last Sunday's or last week's sermon or lesson. You're hitting the major points. You're not re-preaching the sermon. In fact, this should only take 30 seconds or less, a minute or less. You're doing it really quick so that they go, oh yeah, that's where we're coming from. Now I know I'm ready for where we're going. I see that in light of the larger context, okay? And where you get this information from is not only your previous sermon or lesson, but also from all that contextual analysis that you did, and you've built on that week by week, you know. I'm in this chapter, here's the theme of this chapter. I'm in this section, here's the theme of this section. How does it relate to this? And so hopefully you are very disciplined in that, because it'll help you develop this part. And as we read underneath those, some of the points, you quickly bridge the gap between sermons, and you do this to build for understanding. So that your students, that your congregation, they begin to understand the book as a whole. And that's the whole purpose. Now we get to the plural noun proposition. And we've discussed this. This is something that by this time you've already done. And this all flows from your contextual analysis, your syntactical analysis. You've done your mechanical layout. You've identified key words to do word studies in. And through that process, now you've honed in on here's the subject, the glory of Christ. And now you've then developed by asking those two important questions. What is it that I'm saying? In other words, what is the Bible talking about? And the answer is the glory of Christ. Well, what am I saying about the glory of Christ? 1, 2, 3 things. And you've developed your outline from that. And so now you have this plural noun proposition. Here's the elements of it. Let me do this again. What? Plural noun proposition. Okay? So it's plural because you're saying more than one thing. By the way, if you have a 1-point sermon, you've not done it. You're preaching not enough. You've not. If you have a 1-point sermon, you've not identified the subject properly. That's all I'm saying. Okay? So it needs to be plural. You're saying multiple things about one subject. Subject is the noun. Oops. And so plural, we're going to say 3. Our noun for John 12 through 43, our subject rather, is Christ's glory. Okay, and then here's the real interesting part, the proposition. Okay, you look that up in the dictionary, it's going to be something like, here, I'm going to propose, I'm going to say this is what we need to do, this is where we're going, boom, right? But here there's a more hermeneutical kind of understanding of a proposition. So it is a statement of theological truth. You're proposing that this is a biblical, sound, doctrinally, this is a theological truth that I'm proposing to you. And so in this instance, this proposition has to do with the glory of Christ, Christ's true nature, okay? And so that's why we come up with 3 aspects of Christ's glory. You could throw an adjective or something on top of that, 3 beautiful aspects if you want to be verbose or what have you. There's nothing wrong with that. 3 amazing aspects of Christ's incredible glory. You can do those kind of things. I'm a real simple guy, and so it's usually something kind of boring, like 3 aspects of Christ's glory. And so I'm just going lean and mean, and so go ahead. And so some guys choose not to. They'll come up with a lot of colorful language, and again that's fine. That may be your personality, and that needs to come out. But it has to be these at the very least. 3 aspects of Christ's glory. So your subject and your proposition are really closely linked. They almost sound interchangeable, and in this instance they really are. So this proposition is always going to be attached to something profoundly theological. All right? There's nothing more theological than Christ's glory, his true nature. And so you could chapter and verse that in a Grudem or any systematic, and you're going to read, for days on the true nature of Christ. Like, who is Christ? And they're going to unpack that, and they're going to have a whole division of that book that's just set apart just to answer that one question, to be quite honest. And so it needs to be theologically profound, tight. And this is what keeps us from preaching those kind of goofy sermons and giving those kind of lessons that really have no biblical foundation other than pragmatic living. 3 ways to raise kids that are happy. Really? 4 ways to become rich overnight. I don't know. None of those things, those kind of sermon titles or what have you, seem to me to have a real theologically stout groundwork to them whatsoever. And so that's what you're shooting for in your plural noun proposition, a proposition of theological truth. And this is why it's incumbent upon the would-be teacher or preacher, doesn't matter which one, go buy Grudem, live it, learn it, love it, read through it. If you read 6 pages approximately, starting January 1, you'll be done with the whole book by the end of the year approximately, and you'll have, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks of free time somewhere in December, which you could devote to reading Calvin's Institutes, as a supplement. And so read it over and over. And here's why I choose Grudem, by the way. And I'm not holding it up to anything in regards to Scripture, none of that kind of nonsense. I'm not heretical in this. But we have to be disciplined in sharpening our swords all the time in regards to theology, because it is such an essential aspect of proper expository preaching and teaching. You got to know what Christ's glory is all about. And a good systematic theology, and it doesn't have to be Grudem, but a good systematic theology is going to just put that out there real simple for you to access, to get your thoughts together. And if it's a really good systematic theology, it's going to drive you to the text for proof. And that's why I really like Grudem, because it forces you to go to the text, to think deeply about what you say you believe, and will then ultimately preach and teach. So read theology daily in order to be a good preacher or teacher, and to develop a really good plural noun proposition. Here's some key questions for plural noun proposition development. There it is. What am I talking about? The subject. What am I saying about the subject? And again, this is where our main points are derived. Here's some key plural noun proposition words. And what we're talking about is this part right here, aspects, or what have you. 3 aspects, 3 characteristics of the glory of Christ, 3 perspectives concerning the glory of Christ, 3 facets of the glory of Christ, 3 features that you can't live without concerning the glory of Christ, the 3 attributes of the glory of Christ. You see where I'm going with this, right? So I just threw a bunch of those on there so that you have just some different ways of going at it, maybe save you some time so you don't have to go to your thesaurus on your stupid Word document thing and look up all these all over again. So anyway, experiment with those. Now to the all-important purpose. Why is a purpose statement so essential in your preaching and teaching? Here's why. Somebody comes up to you after you've preached, after you've taught, and they tell you, hey, I really liked it, but what was the point of that? What do you want us to do with that? Oof. Now all you've done is dispense a lot of maybe helpful, maybe correct information, even biblical information, not transformational. So here is if you will. Boing. Keep this all on the way. Here's what a purpose statement does. Check it out. This way. Purpose statement, bullseye, every time. That's the whole point. This is where it's you telling your congregation or your people, this is what we're shooting for. One thing.
Yeah.
And it's always a transformational thing. It's never just simply, an intellectual kind of endeavor. It's never limited to an emotive thing. All those things play a part, but this is a doing thing. This is what I'm going to do with everything that you've caused me to understand and even feel. Now I'm going to do something with it. That is the purpose of the purpose statement, is to shoot for something, man. And if you don't get this, in fact, for me, this is the most important aspect of any preaching in regards to the introduction. Perhaps even more important than get attention and secure interest, as essential as those are. Because if you do not state a purpose, then, it's just in the back of their head, they're going, why am I here? And you tell them that up front, man. So that they know somewhere in the back of their head, I'm going. And by the way, this is what I have found to be true. When you're preaching on a regular basis, teaching on a regular basis, your people, this outline, in the way that you preach and teach, they know it. They could come up with their own plural noun proposition just looking at the text. You're training them to be in the Word for themselves, and they'll be able to look at it and go, oh, I know what he wants us to do with this, because, it's the glory of Christ. These other people have he wants us to submit to who Christ truly is and not come to him with these preconceived ideas. We don't get to make Christ out to be whatever we want. I have to submit to who he says he is. Bam. And they may even come up with that before you even start preaching, just looking at the text. Because they know he's going to get my attention, secure interest. This is the purpose. And now all of a sudden they're the students of God's Word. And this is a beautiful thing. It's powerful.
Yeah.
And so, here's how you develop the purpose for your sermon. You ask these 3 questions, not in this particular order. In fact, I would rather start with the second question there. It says, why did God put this passage in the Bible? In the case of John 12, verses 12 through 43, I believe he put that passage in the Bible so that we could understand we do not get to put Jesus in our box and recreate him in our image or imagine him as the way we would prefer him to be, a political king, a sinner that's bent on ruining all other religion, some kind of a miracle worker, just that, or just somebody that is really interesting historical figure. Now, we don't get to do that. God put this passage in the Bible so that Jesus could stand there and go, this is who I am. This is the glory of Christ. This is who I truly am. So, that's why he put it in there. So, now this helps me think. And this is the way I do it, by the way. I have this all in my Word document. I cut and paste it. Bam. I put it right there, and I'm answering these questions. Why did God put this in the Bible? So that Jesus could tell us who he truly is and not allow us to impose our preconceived ideas onto him. Boom. That's why it's in the Bible, okay? And so I throw that there. Why are you preaching this sermon? Or even redundantly, the third question, what are you wanting your people to do in response to this passage? And this is where it's real important you use the word you. Not us, not them, not our. You look at somebody in the eye and you say you. I want you, my purpose, and I say it that way. I may put it like this, my desire, my purpose, my intent, or some other synonymous term, but I make sure they understand this is where we're going. This is the target. My purpose is for you, not the dude sitting next to you, not your wife, not your kids. I want you to acknowledge who Christ truly is and submit to him instead of imposing your preconceived ideas on him any longer. time to get real with the true Christ. Mm-hmm. I want you to do that. And now all of a sudden they're going, me? Yeah, you. And look, man, this is a powerful little thing, because now you can take, if it's in a small group, all of them are going to think, the dude was just talking to me. Yeah, you. Mm-hmm. If you're in a large group, you're going to shrink that room. You're going to take 100 people, and by using, especially in this purpose statement, that personal pronoun, you, they're going to say, who, me? And you're going to be going, yeah, engage. This is when you really need to engage. And they go, he is talking to me. This is what he's wanting me to do. This is what I've refused to do for so long. And this is where this sermon, this lesson is going. He's talking to me. And I love how, if you will, that most profound theologian, Bruce Dickinson, the lead singer of Iron Maiden, he said that his job as a lead man of a metal band is to take 60,000 screaming fans and shrink the room to where they're all right there in front of him, one guy. And now he can look at him and go, yeah, you. That's what we're doing is this as well. We want this purpose statement to take the room and shrink it to where it's just one guy, and you are talking intentionally to that one guy. This is what I want you to do. And when you do that, everybody in that room, Lord willing, goes, who, me? And you go, yeah, you. This is where we're going. Mm-hmm. It's a really powerful tool. And so then, here's our last element. Repeat the plural noun proposition. Now, why would you do that? You've already given it. I remember a guy that was in my preaching class, and he refused to repeat the plural noun proposition. He graduated with a C, I'm sure. No, I'm just guessing. But he wouldn't do it. He was very argumentative about this. Here's what our professor, Dr. Aubrey, said. He's like, look, there's a real simple reason why we repeat it and why it's strategically placed right before you go into point one. It's because redundancy is just good teaching. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So why not repeat it? Mm-hmm. So you've gone through everything. You've gotten to their attention, done some video clip of people answering the question, well, who is Christ to you? Blah, 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 blah. You've secured interest. You've asked them specifically, have you ever thought about that? Because this is very relevant to your eternal state. Your answer to this question, who is Christ? That's what's going to determine, if you will, if you spend an eternity in hell or an eternity in the presence of God. Now you've secured their interest. Like, oh my gosh, I wonder who Christ is. You know, do I have the right answer? You connect it very quickly with the previous sermon, which in this case, I believe it's, you know, I know it's John 11. Is that Lazarus and the healing of Lazarus? And so you connect back, you know, Jesus had healed Lazarus, and however you want to situate that. And then you go into the plural noun proposition. So that's what happened with Lazarus. And now we're going to look at the three aspects of Christ's glory. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to give your purpose statement. And my intent here this morning or whatever is to enable you to submit to who Christ really is, because that's what's meant by that word glory, doxa or doxology. It's not just a big shiny light. It is a light that reveals the truth about the character, the nature of God, of Jesus in this instance. And so I want you to throw away your ideas about who Christ is and submit to who he says he is. That's my purpose for you this morning. And so let's get started as we look at these three aspects of the glory of Christ. We've repeated that plural noun proposition. And now, point one. Now we're ready to launch into the sermon. You got it?
Yeah.
Let's go preach.
Okay. All right.
Awesome.
Right now? Oh, no.
All right, guys, that's it. Next week, we're going to be covering the conclusion. I know some of you are just doing the videos exclusively, and I hope that you're able to hang with this. If you have questions, you can email me at tim@gracehill.church, or you can even call me, area code 505-947-9687. God bless. Thanks.